Yeah, I've actually never listened to or heard of you before. My buddy sent me this my stream. He said, "Hey, you got to check it out."
Okay. Welcome.
I just joined about 15 minutes ago, so I didn't catch a lot of everything that was going on. But I'm curious, how do you define Scripture?
Do you mean like how do I define it in terms of the list of the books, or just in principle what that is for us?
In a list of the books.
Well, the Orthodox Church accepts the list that comes from the canons of Carthage that was affirmed at Trullo and in the 6th and 7th councils.
Okay. So, out of curiosity, if the Orthodox Church, would you consider yourself Orthodox?
Yeah.
Okay. So if it was formed in the 6th and 7th council, would you consider any books that the Jews believed in to be canonized, or would you say that there has to be scrutiny placed upon them?
Well, I don't think the church's decision was based primarily on what Jews accepted. It was based on a host of factors, such as what texts were utilized in the liturgy, what texts were historically cited by previous councils and church fathers, what texts does the New Testament cite for the Old Testament, what texts are in the Septuagint, because the Septuagint includes the Deuterocanon. So I think for the church in these centuries where this is being codified, they're looking to a lot of different things, including oral tradition, including the liturgy.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Excellent. I'm not trying to get you on a gotcha or anything. This is one of my favorite debates to have. I personally think that the Orthodox Church and most Christian churches, including the I don't know if you consider the LDS Church Christian or not, but no. I believe that most of them, actually I'd say all of them, don't know how to define Scripture, and I'm going to lay my argument out really quickly for you. So in the Dead Sea Scrolls contained the first 5 books, and it also contained passages from First Enoch. It actually contains, they are guessing the entirety of First Enoch, but so much of it was destroyed that they couldn't make it out. But there are a lot of passages from First Enoch that indicate that the book was there. And then in Jude 13:15, there is a obvious reference to First Enoch, First and Second Enoch.
We're all aware of that. We're aware of that, yeah.
Okay. So you sit there, and depending on who you want to argue with, whether or not it was Jesus' cousin or Jesus' brother, you have him here making a reference to First Enoch. You see that there are Jews of the era that are using the book First Enoch. And then the councils get together and decide that, well, this sounds crazy, we're not going to include it.
It's not just, quote, because it sounds crazy. It's just that the provenance of the text could not be established. But as Orthodox, we don't have a problem admitting that there's extra canonical tradition. We believe in oral tradition. And sometimes, quote, oral tradition can actually be recorded and written down. So there's no problem for us as Orthodox saying, like we say with, the Proto-Evangelium of James or the Book of Enoch, those are part of the tradition, even if they're not canonical.
Well, there's actually more. I guess you could say that there's more of a. My apologies. I'm struggling to remember the word you just said. I know what the word means, and I'm sorry, I don't do this very often over a live system, so a little intimidated about that. But there's more evidence. We have more of a chain of custody for First Enoch than we do Revelations, but yet they accept Revelations.
A chain of custody for First Enoch. What do you mean by that?
So we have a chain of custody of First Enoch first showing up amongst Pharisees and circles of Pharisees in Judea.
So there's hold on. So there's a false assumption here that, quote, chain of custody or early date or any of that has anything to do with truth or falsity. It may or it may not. So, for example, there's some of the pseudepigraphical texts or some of the Gnostic texts have a lot of provenance, and they might have a lot of attestation. That has nothing to do with whether they're canonical or whether they're historical or whether they're should be used. I mean, why should I refer to what you think is a chain of custody when presumably you don't believe in apostolic succession anyway? Are you Mormon or Protestant? Why'd you mention Mormons? What's
I
your
consider
deal?
my well. I see my buddy Seth is now listening to this, so he's going to laugh when I say this because he vehemently disagrees with me. I would consider myself Protestant, but I'm not a member of the LDS Church. I can't stand the LDS Church. There's no one on planet Earth that will go harder against the LDS Church than me. But I am a believer.
You brought up
Mormons.
You're what?
I am a believer of the Book of Mormon, but it's an incredibly esoteric conversation that I don't know if you want to go into, but I'm willing to.
Okay, so tell me why Joseph Smith would add about 13 verses to Genesis if he's a true prophet, predicting himself.
Okay, so you have to go into the reasons for the Joseph Smith translation, and the reasons for the Joseph Smith translation is that they're over time from when Genesis was written to now, there were pieces of it that were picked apart by the Deuteronomists, and I mean the Jews admit this themselves. There were pieces and parts of it that were picked apart because it didn't fit into their current narrative of the time period at about
what are you talking
500
about?
AD.
Deuteronomist, that's a Julius Wellhausen, later German higher critical thing. What does that have to do with this?
Well, so there were pieces and parts of the first 5 books that were picked apart by Jews at about 500 AD because it didn't fit their personal political narratives at the time period.
Okay, hold on. So you're saying the Jews in 500 AD took out the prophecies of Joseph Smith?
No. That's not the argument I'm making because that would be completely and totally refuted just based on the fact that we have copies of the Old Testament that are far older than 500 AD. That would just be retarded. No.
Well, all of this is retarded. So all of these verses added by Joseph Smith are retarded.
I would disagree with you. I would agree that Joseph Smith. So the funny thing is, I don't actually think that Joseph Smith is a polygamist. I don't think that there's any solid evidence for that Joseph Smith was ever a polygamist. And the reason why I'm bringing that up is there's a lot of the Book of Mormon that was added post Joseph Smith's death. So I mean, you look at 132. It's section 132.
Why are you changing the subject from obviously fraudulent additions to the Book of Genesis?
The reason why I'm doing this is because there was a lot of stuff that was added to the Book of Mormon post Joseph Smith's death, and we have evidence of that. And a lot of the stuff in the Joseph Smith translation of the Bible was the stuff that was added post Joseph.
Does that apply to this? So Joseph Smith didn't add the prophecies of himself in Genesis. Somebody else did? Is that what you're saying?
So that's the problem, is we don't know entirely what was added or subtracted post Joseph Smith.
You can't tell that this is obviously a con man adding to the Book of Genesis. You already admitted that we have older copies that don't have him in there. And you brought up 500 AD Jews. What does that have to do with this? And Deuteronomist, that's a later higher critical thing. So you're all over the place. Why is this not fraudulent?
Specifically what? Sorry. We
the added verses to Genesis 50 predicting Joseph Smith in his translation. That's obviously a fraud.
Can you explain to me, okay, just genuinely curious, I'm not trying to be that jackass, can you explain to me why that would be fraudulent?
You literally just out of your own mouth said we have all kinds of ancient copies, older than even 500 AD, none of which have 13 extra verses in Genesis 15 predicting Joseph Smith.
Well, I'll be honest with you. You got me a little stumped on that one. I need to look into that. I need to look into that a bit more.
Right. So if you read Genesis, if you read Genesis 50, what happens is at the end of the book, it ends with the death of Joseph. And Joseph Smith, because he's obviously a jokester, added sections about himself as if the prediction of Joseph is about him when the context is talking about the patriarch Joseph. Now, beyond all of that, would you agree that, say, for example, the temple rituals in Mormonism, doesn't that all come out of Freemasonry? Isn't he copy pasting from Freemasonry?
No, he isn't, and I'm so glad you brought this up because this is one of the things I'm super passionate about. The LDS Church actually just acquisitioned the only temple that was built under Joseph Smith's watch, the Kirkland Temple, and they announced that they're not going to be using it as a temple. And the problem is that because the only thing that's in that building is a lobby and a meeting house. There's nothing else in that building. There's no sealing rooms. There's no baptisms for the dead
Dude,
room.
I don't know what you're
There's
talking
no-
about some individual building. I'm talking about within the
No,
temple.
no. This matters. This genuinely matters because the stuff you're talking about, the Freemasonry, the secret handshakes, the baptisms for the dead, the
entire
naked
temple
handshakes,
ritual is
all of that,
copy paste
all of
Freemasonry.
that. No. You are. I'm sorry, but on this one, you're genuinely incorrect. And please let me defend my argument right here. So all of the stuff that is obvious Freemasonry did not come from Joseph. We know this because we can look at the structure and the
I don't
practice
know,
that
but
were
see,
taught.
I don't care about defending some individual pure Joseph Smith thing versus the corruptions of later Mormonism. I mean, you said that you're
100%. 100%. The LDS
dude, no,
Church
this
and all
is
the
dude,
temples
nobody
across
cares
the
about
church.
nobody cares about your individual made up Mormonism. That you're the true flame, like preserver of Joseph Smith. Like, this is preposterous.
Well, it's not just me and one person; it's thousands of us. But the LDS
Okay, well,
Church.
so what is your sect?
Because
Because you acted like it was just you. So now there actually is some. What sect is it?
it's called Remnant. So there's about 22,000.
All right, so let's just cut this out from the get-go. The Old Testament makes it clear that when Jesus comes, there won't be any new prophets. When the Messiah arrives, Luke 16:16 says that John the Baptist was the last of the prophets, and that's why Joseph Smith mistranslates that as well, because he knows that if Jesus and John are the last of the prophets, he can't be a prophet. So the same way that I'm going to cut out Muhammad and all of his nonsense is the exact same way that your cult is cut out, which is that there is no more prophets after the death of the apostles.
You know, back when I was a younger, much more vehemently into this, I actually had an argument for that, specifically for the verses in John.
No, Luke 16. Luke 16:16.
Yeah. I had an argument for that at one point when I was much more passionate about it, but...
well, so why is Joseph Smith translating his versions contrary to what everybody has in their versions prior to Joseph Smith?
I'll be honest with you, sir. I don't have a good argument for that, but I do have a good argument for the Masonic stuff. If you let me bring that up, because Joseph Smith had nothing to do with the Masonic stuff.
No, I mean, look, I don't really even care about that, because if Joseph Smith is not a prophet, all that other bullshit falls away too.